Well, good morning, everyone. We're about noonish. Today is October 31st. Happy Halloween, everyone. And yeah, meow. You go wait. That's Captain Cat being chatty. Now the fog lifted. It was a cool, foggy morning this morning, so I need to get outside and do a lot of housework or yard work. I still got some housework to do too, but I got a lot of yard work to do, which I'm way behind. Oh, knock it off. And so I was finishing up coffee. Oh yeah. And but I thought, since it's Halloween, I'm probably not gonna need any trick-or-treaters out here in the woods. I thought I'd pull a book off the shelf and read you a ghost story from Michigan. In fact, I'm gonna attempt to do three stories, one from three different books. But I'm going to post those as separate videos because my uploads are hellish. No pun intended. Well, I guess that's not a pun. But anyway. And so I'm going to record them individually, and we'll see if I can get all three uploaded today. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to try and do that while I'm out and about doing laundry. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, our first reading today for Halloween. And these are, really intended for my lovely daughter Brianna, my wonderful grandson Leo. But you are all welcome to enjoy the story. So our first reading will be Ghost Stories of Michigan by Dan Asfar, I suppose. Let's see here. If y'all were interested in this book, this is, where's our ISBN? There it is. Printed in 1973. Oh, that's crazy. The year I was born. I got an ISBN number of 13:1-978-1-894877-05-03. Second ISBN 10:1-894877-0505. And this is, again, Ghost Stories of Michigan by Dan Asfar. The story we'll read today, I know I'm not going to pronounce this right. It's French. It's not Charlevoix or Le Cheneau. It's Seul. Seul, something. Seul. We'll call it Seul. Choix, Charlevoix? I don't know. Seul Char Point, Seul Show Point, Sioux Show Point, something like that. Sioux Show Point. Some paranormal experts have noted that cultures emerging from the humid climates tend to have more ghostly legends in their folklore than cultures from arid regions. Time and again, it has been observed that areas near large bodies of water tend to be fraught with more supernatural activity than landlocked locations. For example, the damp locales of Scotland and Ireland have high incidences of ghostly activity. And what about the significant number of spectral tales told in monsoon India versus a sparse number of such stories that haunt the desert regions of Egypt? Does water truly beget ghosts? Like everything else regarding the supernatural, the theory is riddled with uncertainty. Surely there are plenty of other variables such as population, history, culture, which may account for the greater number of ghosts in the damper regions of the earth. And then, what do we make of the exceptions to these generalizations? The American Plains, for instance, are famous among paranormal aficionados for their high frequency of hauntings. Whether or not ghosts share a relationship with the Earth's waters is up for speculation. But if one intends to argue that those beings of the netherworld are indeed aquatically inclined, Sioux Show Point jutting out from Michigan's Upper Peninsula, would be an excellent case in point. The lone finger of land pointing down into Lake Michigan's northern waters is saturated with spirits. Stories of Indian graves, mysterious women gazing out of windows of empty houses, the sound of footsteps unaccountable to any material presence, wandering female phantoms, and voices in empty rooms circulate around a cluster of old houses near the small town of Gulliver. The bizarre events culminate on the tip of the peninsula in Seul Choix Lighthouse, one of the most haunted lights that stand over the Great Lakes. In the mid-18th century, Seul Choix was quite literally the sole choice for French voyagers and Indians looking for a haven while ferrying their furry cargoes along the lake's exposed northern shores. As the fur trade ran its course, the erstwhile voyagers' port became a thriving fishing center, and the peninsula turned into a bustling ground for a new, more settled French-Canadian community. It seems that these first inhabitants established a long attachment to their new home in the Upper Peninsula, for even today, long after time has claimed their corporal essences, some parts of these early settlers lingers over Seul Choix. In a cluster of houses built next to an Indian graveyard, 3 homes seem to be a focus of paranormal activity on the peninsula. Frederick Stonehouse relates some of its bizarre events going on in these homes in Haunted Lakes 2, More Great Lakes Stories. Stonehouse states that the ghost of an angry spirit, an Indian woman, lives in one of the houses. And we have a picture of the Seul Choix Lighthouse. A broken clock hung in the kitchen of this home. The father noticed that the clock wasn't working one morning and told his son to throw it out in the swamp. Later that day, the boy threw out the busted contraption, and the matter would have been concluded right then and there, if the two lived in a normal house, that is. Not 2 days had passed when the father, sitting with a neighbor at the kitchen table, noticed the clock hanging on the wall. He glared at his son. "I thought I told you to toss that thing out, boy." The child was genuinely amazed at the reappearance of the clock, and after a few moments of dumbfounded silence, protested his innocence so fervently that his father could only believe him. Yeah, right. The neighbor did as well, and was spooked enough by the incident that he would have never set foot in the house again. On a cold winter's day, some time later, another boy was walking home after hunting rabbits when he noticed a young girl staring out the second-floor window of that same house. Knowing full well that the place was supposed to be empty, he stopped and stared back for a few minutes, when an icier, more profound kind of chill than the winter weather made its way up his back. Suddenly uneasy, he turned his back on the house and started making his way home. He looked over his shoulder after taking a few steps, but there was no one there any longer. The girl with the expressionless stare had just vanished. There had been numerous other accounts of strange incidents in the house, the wood stove acting up by itself even when unlit, sounds of footsteps upstairs where there was nobody. The mysteries in the place developed another layer when renovations revealed secret chambers both in the attic and underneath the kitchen floor. One of the house's previous owners had sealed shut a room in the attic. Inside were a wealth of artifacts from the 1930s, including calendars, fishing equipment, old trunks, and tins. The trapdoor concealed in the kitchen floor led to a hidden cellar that was much more eerie than the room upstairs. Apparently the room was intended as cold storage in the days before people had refrigerators. It was filled with cans of preserved fruits and fish. But something much more difficult to come to terms with lay in the cold, dank blackness of the underground chamber. For there, partially embedded in the sand floor of the sealed cellar, the homeowners discovered the skeleton of a young girl. When a worker was laying the foundation of a barn just outside, he dug up what looked like tin coffins plated, two tin coffin plates, one reading, Our Darling, the other engraved with, Our Loved One. Digging a little deeper, the man found what remained of a girl's shoe. With the Indian burial ground nearby, the skeleton in the cellar, and the coffins just outside the house, it is no wonder that there was so much spiritual activity taking place in Seul Choix Point. Strange voices and apparitions have been observed in the two surrounding houses. One day, several people spotted the apparition of a lone woman walking down the road from the beach. She drifted casually past the houses and disappeared into the woods. Almost everyone there had recognized her from community photographs that were more than a half a century old. If Seul Choix Point might be able to compete for the dubious honor of most haunted place in Michigan, the peninsula's lighthouse is definitely one of the most talked of lights on the Great Lakes. Really? Okay. As is often the case with Michigan lighthouses, it seems that one of the light's long deceased keepers still lingers in the station. His name was Captain William Townsend, a British sea dog who immigrated to the United States in the late 1800s. In 1902, after working on the docks of Mackinac Island for a few years, he was appointed keeper of Seul Choix Point. Given the lighthouse's uneventful history, his tenure... Really? Okay. Given the lighthouse's uneventful history, his tenure as a light's keeper would probably have passed without notice if it weren't for the sudden illness that struck him early in August 1910. Townsend's brother nursed him as best he was able, but the two last days of the keeper's life were spent in the bedroom at the top of the stairs. Breathing in almost unbearable agony, he died on August 10th of that year. History tells us not much about the ordinary. History tells us that not much out of the ordinary transpired at Seul Choix Point when the lighthouse was still active. One of the Coast Guard's last keepers did report that fingerprints would mysteriously appear on the tower's Fresnel lens after he had just finished cleaning it. Perhaps Captain Townsend knew that the light's days as a manned station were coming to an end, and the old spirit was protesting the new era of automated lighthouses. Accounts of strange occurrences began to circulate regularly after the light was automated in 1973. A caretaker that was hired to look after the place when the Coast Guard abandoned it, and both he and his family were thoroughly frightened by more than a few inexplicable occurrences. The caretaker would later say that everyone in the family had seen shadows on the curtains of the upstairs window when nobody was home. The sound of slow, laden footsteps on the second floor would often wake everyone up in the middle of the night, and then there were those instances when a family member would be stricken by the overwhelming sense that something unseen was just standing over him or her, watching silently. Wow, what a sense. The frequency and intensity of these supernatural experiences increased after the Gulliver Historical Society bought the lighthouse in 1988. The first accounts came from inmates from the Camp Manistee prison laborers who were working on the first phase of restoration in the lighthouse. The fear in their voices made it clear that their complaints to the foreman weren't motivated solely by idleness. Stately flatting that they would do anything else that needed to get done in the building, several of the inmates refused to go to the second floor, where they felt that same invisible presence that the caretaker had spoken about hovering just over them. After that, the stories kept coming in. There was the carpenter contracted to do renovations who was frightened out of the empty lighthouse by an invisible person's footsteps. It was those same slow, plodding footsteps that started on the second floor, but this time began making their way downstairs to where the man was working. He refused to work in the lighthouse by himself after that. After the lighthouse was opened to the public, most common reports made by visitors was that of a thick, sickly scent of cigar smoke that would suddenly waft over them on the second floor when no one in the place was smoking. The dining room on the ground floor was also a hotbed of supernatural activity. Captain Townsend, not willing to let go of his English roots, was intent on having the dinner table set according to British custom. Day after day, the museum curator would come in to find the silverware rearranged to British style with the fork, forks turned tines down. Initially, the creator would take the trouble to rearrange the silverware, yet it was not long before it was decided that it wasn't worth arguing with the ghost, and the table arrangement was left alone. Stonehouse tells the story of a television crew from a local station that came to the lighthouse in June 1997 to do a story on the building's restoration. One of the cameramen, intrigued by the pages of sheet music on the antique piano, put the music for one of his favorite tunes, Spanish Eyes, on top of the piano's music holder. He and his crew left the lighthouse with the guides to shoot some footage of the grounds for a while. Something inside the cameraman grew very cold when he returned to the room with the piano. There, on top of the sheet music holder, were the notes "For Whom the Bell Tolls." "Who rearranged the sheet music on the piano?" the startled man asked the guides. Not only could no one answer him, but they told him that they would have been able not only could no one answer him, but they told the man that they would have been the last people in the room before they shot the footage of the grounds because the door had been kept locked during the tour. A few members of the television crew spent the night at the lighthouse. They were awakened several times in the evening by foul-smelling cigar smoke. The funk got so bad at one point that one of the crewmen almost left the lighthouse for a hotel. I find that hard to believe. We're going to find a hotel. I'm assuming this is in Canada, actually. As eerie as all these occurrences were, the most unsettling events involved the mirror in the upstairs bedroom. In the past, some people believed the mirror left uncovered in a dying man's room could seal his soul during the moments of death. People have witnessed the ghostly mirror in Seul Choix may not have been so quick to dismiss this belief as mere superstition. The large circular mirror rests in the same room that Captain Townsend passed away in. It is mounted atop a dresser and faces the one bed in the room. On some nights, the mirror offers much more than a reflection. Witnesses have seen the placid glass surface suddenly transform from a mirror to something like a window looking into another place. The reflection is replaced by thick clouds of gray mist rolling violently just on the other side of the glass. Before long, the swirling vapor appears to take shape, gradually taking the image of a grinning skull. It says here in the caption, An isolated lighthouse is often the last sight for drowning crews on the Great Lakes." And somebody has a sketched out lighthouse there. The mist does not rest at the leering image, but continues to boil. Slowly, the head in the mirror forms distinguishing characteristics: a man with bushy eyebrows, a long nose, and mustache and beard. A woman who had recently moved to Gulliver with her husband glimpsed a much more concrete image of this man in the forest surrounding the lighthouse. "I was in the car with my husband, taking a ride for the day, and we decided to visit the Seul Choix lighthouse," she tells Stonehouse in Haunted Lakes 2. "My husband was driving, and I was enjoying the scenery along Lake Michigan. As we approached the parking lot at the entrance to the lighthouse park, I looked over at a small clearing in the woods and noticed an old man leaning against a tree. He had a bushy white beard and eyebrows and was dressed in a dark blue uniform with matching hat. The woman thought it odd that such a strangely dressed man would be just standing there, leaning against a tree, blankly staring into space. She blinked once, and he was gone. The woman told her husband what she had seen, but they both assumed that the man was one of the Historical Society's employees doing a reenactment. Okay. A few months later, when she was reading... I know, I hear you. A few months later, when she was reading a newspaper article with her father... A few months later, when she was reading a newspaper article her father had given her, the woman suddenly made sense of the figure in the woods. When I was reading the story, I immediately got chills all over my body and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a story about the ghost of Seul Choix. The man I had seen leaning against a tree and the man in the picture were the exact same. For reasons she could never explain, she had been thinking about the lighthouse keeper in the woods since she had seen him. Now she knew why they had made such an impression. Now she knew why he had made such an impression. The man was a ghost. So it is that the man in the mirror, the man in the woods, and the man in the newspaper are one and the same. Captain Willie Townsend, the old British seaman who had manned the lighthouse from 1902 to 1910, smoked cheap cigars, and died a painful death in the second-floor bedroom. Whether it is circumstance of his death or the supernatural aura that seems to envelop Seul Choix that led to the haunting, the ghost of Willie is among the most active lighthouse phantoms on the Great Lakes. And to this day, visitors to the place are walking away with outlandish experiences. There have been sudden blasts of cold air in the lights halls. People who have tried to communicate directly with Willie have suddenly become violently ill, and others have seen a dark figure walking across the hall in the parlor. And of course, there is the overpowering cigar smell that wafts through the building, though no living person in the building or on the grounds would have the stomach to smoke such a smelly thing. That is from Specters on the Lakes, Ghost Stories of Michigan. So, I'm procrastinating because I don't feel like blowing and raking leaves or doing laundry. So I tell you what, let's see if we got time for one more, alright? So I'm going to cut this video, and then we'll upload the second story as a second video, okay? Sorry for the awkward reading, but I hope you all enjoyed that. We'll see you in the next story here. Happy Halloween, all.